I am Amaris, 30 years old, and the night my family threw a $24,000 birthday party for my twin brother, they made me the delivery driver. I arrived at the Ritz-Carlton carrying his $2,000 gold flake cake, only to find my name completely left off the guest list for our shared birthday. When my mother told me I was not elite enough to mingle with his VIP guests, I simply smiled, set the cake down, and walked away. What they did not know was that the billionaires they were trying to impress were actually my clients, paying me millions to hide their darkest secrets. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut ties with toxic family members who completely underestimated your worth. The shrill ringing of my phone shattered the quiet of my Saturday afternoon. I was sitting in my penthouse office reviewing a non-disclosure agreement when the caller ID flashed my mother Brenda's name. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for whatever demand was about to come next, and answered the call. "Amaris, I need you to do something right now," my mother barked into the receiver. "No, hello. No asking how I was doing, just an immediate order. You need to drive over to Sweet Elegance Bakery and pick up Trayvon's birthday cake. The bakery is refusing to deliver it because of the rain, and we are entirely too busy setting up the ballroom at the Ritz-Carlton to deal with this right now." I glanced at the dates on my desk calendar. It was October 12th, our birthday. Trayvon and I are twins born exactly 12 minutes apart, yet listening to my mother's frantic voice, you would think I was just a hired assistant. "Mom," I said slowly, trying to keep my voice even, "I am actually in the middle of some work right now, and it is pouring outside. Can you not send one of the hotel staff to get it?" "Absolutely not," she snapped. "Do you have any idea how much this cake cost?" $2,000, Amaris. It is a custom gold flake red velvet masterpiece. I am not trusting it to some random hotel bellboy. Just put your little freelance projects on hold for an hour and go get it. Trayvon is about to be promoted to vice president, and this party has to be absolutely flawless. Chelsea's father is flying in, and you know how her family is. We cannot afford any mistakes in front of old money white folks. The familiar sting of her words washed over me. Chelsea was Trayvon's wife, a woman who never missed an opportunity to remind us that her family practically owned half of the real estate in Atlanta. My mother worshipped the ground Chelsea walked on, desperate to prove that our family was just as elite, just as refined, just as excellent. In her eyes, Trayvon marrying Chelsea was the ultimate prize. Meanwhile, because I kept my public relations firm highly discreet and dressed comfortably instead of wearing conspicuous designer labels, my mother assumed I was barely scraping by as a struggling freelancer. I looked at the multi-million-dollar contract sitting on my desk, then sighed. "Fine. I will go get the cake. Make sure you do not smudge the icing," she commanded, and hung up without another word. Not a single happy birthday. Not a single acknowledgement that today was my milestone too. I was turning 30 just like her golden boy, but in the hierarchy of this family, my existence was merely a footnote to his success. I drove through the heavy Atlanta rain to the bakery, picked up the massive, unnecessarily heavy cake box, and headed toward the Ritz-Carlton downtown. The drive gave me entirely too much time to think. Growing up, our birthdays had always been a shared affair until we turned 18. After that, the focus shifted entirely to Trayvon. When he graduated college, they threw a massive backyard barbecue. When I graduated from the exact same university, a semester early with higher honors, my mother handed me a gift card to a chain restaurant and told me I needed to focus on finding a husband instead of being so overly ambitious. I pulled my car up to the valet at the Ritz-Carlton. The valet attendant rushed out with an umbrella, taking my keys and offering a polite smile. I carefully lifted the cake box and walked through the grand double doors of the hotel lobby. The opulence of the space was undeniable, with crystal chandeliers casting a warm glow over the polished marble floors. I followed the signs pointing toward the grand ballroom, balancing the heavy box against my hip. As I turned the corner into the main event corridor, I stopped dead in my tracks. Standing at the entrance of the ballroom was a massive 10-foot LED display board. It was glowing with elegant cursive letters that read, Traven's 30th Extravaganza. Welcome to the elite era. I stood there staring at the illuminated sign. There was no Amaris and Trayvon. There was no joint celebration. My own twin brother had thrown a $24,000 milestone birthday bash paid for entirely by our parents and completely erased my name from our shared birthday. The sheer audacity of it made a bitter laugh bubble up in my throat. I adjusted my grip on the cake box and marched straight toward the ballroom doors, ready to drop this ridiculous dessert and leave. But before I could even step onto the plush carpet of the ballroom entrance, a large man in a sharp black suit stepped directly in front of me, crossing his arms over his chest. "Excuse me, miss," he said, his voice deep and authoritative. "I am going to need to see some identification. This is a private event. I am delivering the cake," I said, shifting the box slightly so he could see the bakery logo. "And I am the birthday boy's sister." The security guard pulled a leather-bound clipboard from his jacket pocket and scanned the pages. "I am sorry, miss. I have a strict guest list here provided by the host. Nobody gets in unless their name is on this list." "What is your name?" "Amaris Washington," I replied, my patience wearing dangerously thin. He ran his finger down the printed list of names. He checked the first page, then the second, then flipped back to the first. He looked up at me, his expression entirely unsympathetic. "I do not have an Amaris Washington on here," he said flatly. The instructions from Mrs. Chelsea Washington were very clear. No plus ones, no walk-ins, and no exceptions. If you are not on the VIP list, you do not get past this checkpoint. I stared at him, the weight of the $2,000 cake pressing into my arms. I was standing in the hallway of a luxury hotel holding my twin brother's birthday cake, on our actual birthday being denied entry to his party by a security guard because my own family did not even bother to put my name on the guest list. The disrespect was so profound, so meticulously calculated, that it practically took my breath away. "Let me get this straight," I said, looking the guard dead in the eye. "You are telling me that Trayvon and Chelsea did not put his own twin sister on the guest list?" "I just follow the list, miss," he replied, stepping closer to physically block the doorway. "You will have to leave the box here with me, or I will have to ask you to exit the premises." Before I could formulate a response that did not involve dropping the cake directly onto his polished dress shoes, the heavy wooden doors of the ballroom swung open. There, holding a clipboard and wearing an incredibly smug expression, stood Chelsea. Chelsea stood framed by the warm glow of the ballroom lighting. She wore a floor-length emerald green gown that draped perfectly over her figure, an outfit that probably cost more than my brother's first car. Her blonde hair was swept into a flawless updo, and heavy diamonds rested against her collarbone. She walked toward me with a slow, deliberate strut, her heels clicking sharply against the polished marble floor. As she approached, she looked me up and down, her gaze lingering critically on my simple black blazer-fitted trousers and comfortable loafers. To Chelsea, my work attire was nothing but worthless rags. "Well, look who finally decided to show up and do something useful," Chelsea said. Her voice carried that distinct clipped tone of someone who is used to giving orders to the hired help. She did not say hello. She did not ask how my drive was in the pouring rain. She certainly did not wish me a happy birthday. She simply snapped her perfectly manicured fingers at the security guard, silently instructing him to step aside so she could deal with me directly. I tightened my grip on the bottom of the heavy cake box. "Chelsea," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level and devoid of the anger building in my chest. "The bakery refused to deliver in the storm, so Mom asked me to bring this over. I was just telling your security guard here that my name seems to have been conveniently left off the guest list." Chelsea let out a short, breathy laugh that held absolutely no humor. "It was not a mistake, Amaris." She stepped closer. "Your name is not on the list because you were not invited. This is an exclusive event. We are hosting the absolute elite of Atlanta tonight. Trayvon is on the verge of a massive promotion to vice president, and the people in that room right now hold the keys to his future." I stared at her, letting her unbelievable words sink in. My own twin brother was throwing a lavish birthday party on the exact day we both turned 30, and his wife was proudly admitting that I was purposefully excluded from the celebration. "You are telling me that I am not invited to my own twin brother's birthday party," I said, my tone dangerously calm. On the exact day of my birthday, Chelsea rolled her eyes as if my statement was the most tedious thing she had heard all day. She reached out and snatched the heavy cake box right out of my hands. She passed it immediately to a caterer. "Please take this to the kitchen and have them prep it for the presentation at 9, she ordered the staff member, waving him away. Once the cake was gone, she turned her full attention back to me. Her expression hardened into a mask of pure condescension. "Listen, Amaris, let us be honest. Trayvon loves you because you are blood, but you do not belong in this tier of society. Look at you. You run some struggling freelance consulting gig out of a rented desk space. You show up to our family dinners in plain clothes. You do not network with the right crowds. You do not understand how things work in the high-stakes corporate world." She took a step closer, lowering her voice as if she were sharing a highly classified secret. "My father Richard is flying in specifically for this dinner. He is a billionaire sitting on 3 corporate boards. Trayvon's entire executive team is in that ballroom right now, waiting to rub shoulders with him. The chief executive officer of Trayvon's company is sitting at the head table. These are people of immense influence and wealth. They expect to be surrounded by their peers." I simply looked at her, fighting the overwhelming urge to burst out laughing right there in the corridor. The absolute irony of her arrogant speech was almost too perfect to believe. Chelsea was lecturing me about power and influence, using her father's name as a weapon to put me in my place. She had no idea her billionaire father paid my firm a massive retainer to keep his corporate negligence lawsuits out of the media. She also had no idea her precious chief executive officer was on my private client roster, begging my team for crisis management advice. To Chelsea, I was just a sad, struggling freelancer who could not afford a designer gown. Blinded by privilege, she never bothered to ask what my company actually achieved in the real world of high-stakes corporate crisis management. Trevin has worked incredibly hard to curate his professional image. Chelsea continued, gesturing vaguely toward the heavy wooden doors of the ballroom. "He cannot afford to have a sister hanging around who looks like she just came from running mundane errands. It is frankly embarrassing for him. We need the people in that room to see Trayvon as an equal, not dragging along dead weight." She paused, letting her cruel words hang in the air between us, waiting for me to shatter. She fully expected me to argue, to cry, or to defend my career. That was the dynamic my family thrived on. They loved putting me down so they could feel elevated. They loved treating my quiet life choices as massive failures simply because I did not conform to their rigid standards. "So thank you for delivering the cake like you were asked," Chelsea finished, her lips curling into a triumphant sneer. "But it really would be best if you just went home now. Do not cause a scene and ruin your brother's big night. You can celebrate your birthday tomorrow on your own time." I kept my face perfectly neutral, absorbing every ounce of her disrespect. I was quietly formulating the absolutely perfect and devastating response in my head, preparing to completely tear down her pathetic illusion of superiority piece by piece. When the ballroom doors opened again, and the sound of my mother's voice echoed into the hallway. "Is everything all right out here?" my mother asked, stepping into the corridor. She was wearing a silver sequined gown that I knew cost more than my first car. Her hair was perfectly styled, not a single strand out of place. She patted her necklace, her eyes darting anxiously toward the ballroom, before finally landing on me. "Amaris, good you brought the cake. Did you smudge the icing? Not a single hello, not a happy birthday, just pure, unadulterated concern for a pastry." "The cake is fine, Brenda," I said, dropping the title of Mom. It felt entirely too intimate for the stranger standing in front of me. But Chelsea was just explaining that my name is not on the guest list for our birthday. My mother sighed, a long, exaggerated sound of profound annoyance, as if I were a toddler throwing a tantrum in a grocery store. She walked over and stood shoulder to shoulder with Chelsea, presenting a united, impenetrable front of disdain. "Amaris, please do not start this right now," my mother said, keeping her voice in a harsh whisper. We have guests arriving any minute. Chelsea's father is already inside. I am not starting anything, I replied, my voice steady though my heart was hammering against my ribs. I am just asking for clarification. You spent $24,000 renting out a ballroom at the Ritz-Carlton to celebrate my twin brother's 30th birthday, and you purposely excluded me from the celebration. My mother's face hardened. She crossed her arms, her diamond bracelets catching the light from the chandeliers overhead. Do not be so incredibly selfish, Amaris. You always try to make everything about you. We could only afford one major celebration this year, and Traven actually needs this. He is about to be named vice president of his firm. He needs to network. He needs to impress Richard and the executive board. She took a step closer, her eyes narrowing as she looked at my practical clothes, her gaze echoing Chelsea's earlier disgust. You are going nowhere with that little consulting hobby of yours. You sit at a rented desk and take phone calls all day. What exactly do you need a $24,000 party for? Who are you going to invite? Your landlord. Treven has real connections, real influence. He is bringing honor to this family name, and you are trying to ruin his night because you are jealous. The words hit me like physical blows, but they did not break me. Instead, they crystallized everything I had ever suspected about my place in this family. My mother was not just enabling Chelsea's toxic behavior, she was the architect of it. She had raised Trayvon to believe he was a king, and she had trained me to believe I was nothing but a peasant meant to serve his court. She was obsessed with the illusion of black excellence, desperate to rub shoulders with old money. And she had justified completely erasing my existence on the day of my birth, because my quiet, discreet success did not give her the flashy bragging rights she so desperately craved. I am jealous, I repeated, tasting the word. It was so absurd, it was almost poetic. You think I am jealous of a man who has to beg his mother to buy him a party just so he can kiss up to his father-in-law. Watch your mouth, my mother snapped, pointing a manicured finger at my face. Your brother is building an empire. You are just a freelancer who cannot even afford a decent outfit for a delivery. I will not let your petty insecurities drag him down. You dropped off the cake. Now be a good girl and just go home. We will have a quiet dinner with you next week or something. Chelsea smirked, clearly thrilled to have her mother-in-law validating her cruelty. You heard her, Amaris. Run along now. The elite are waiting. I looked at the two women standing before me. I looked at the heavy wooden doors of the ballroom, knowing my brother was inside basking in the glow of a party bought with my parents' retirement savings and my mother's desperation for status. I felt the final fragile thread tethering me to this toxic family snap completely. There was no sadness left. There was no grief. There was only a cold, sharp clarity settling over my mind like ice. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I simply let a slow, chilling smile spread across my face. It was the same smile I used when a billionaire client tried to lie to me in the boardroom right before I completely dismantled their alibi. You know what I said, my voice eerily calm, smooth as glass. You are absolutely right. My mother blinked momentarily, thrown off balance by my sudden agreement. I am. Yes, I nodded, looking between her and Chelsea. I do not belong in this tier. You two go ahead and enjoy your little party. I hope it is everything you paid for. Before either of them could formulate a response to my sudden shift in demeanor, I turned on my heel and walked away. The sound of my loafers against the marble floor was steady and unhurried. I did not look back. I did not need to. They thought they had just put a struggling, pathetic woman in her place. They had no idea they had just unleashed a titan. I pushed through the grand glass doors of the hotel and stepped out into the damp Atlanta evening. The rain had slowed to a light drizzle. The valet rushed to bring my car around, but I barely noticed him. My mind was already moving 10 steps ahead, calculating, strategizing, and plotting the most devastating counterstrike this city had ever seen. I slid into the driver's seat of my car, the heavy thud of the door sealing me inside my own private sanctuary. I did not start the engine immediately. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. I dialed a number I knew by heart. It rang exactly twice before being answered. Amaris, my executive assistant Jordan, said, his voice crisp and alert. It is Saturday evening. Please tell me you are not working on your birthday. Change of plans, Jordan, I said, my voice ringing with absolute authority. I need you to pull up the master client database, all of them, the politicians, the tech billionaires, the media moguls, and the corporate executives. Done, Jordan replied, the sound of rapid typing echoing through the speaker. What are we looking for? Draft the VIP guest list, I commanded, staring out the windshield at the glowing lights of the Ritz-Carlton lobby. I am throwing a birthday party tonight, and send out the gold invitations, every single one of them. There was a brief pause on the line. The gold invitations were legendary in my firm. They were strictly confidential, non-disclosure bound digital invitations that meant absolute priority. When a gold invitation went out from Amaris Communications, it was not a request. It was a summons from the woman who held the keys to their deepest, darkest public relations nightmares. Sending the gold invitations on zero notice, Jordan clarified, a hint of awe in his voice. Where are we hosting this? At the Hilltop Estate, I said smoothly. Tell them it is an exclusive client appreciation gala celebrating my 30th. Oh, and Jordan. Yes, boss. Make sure Richard and the executive board of Traven's company receive their invitations immediately. I have a feeling they are currently wasting their time at a very boring event downtown. I hung up the phone and finally started my car. My mother and my brother wanted to play a game of status and power. They wanted to humiliate me by locking me out of a room full of people they worshipped. It was time to show them what real power looked like. It was time to show them that while they were busy renting a ballroom to pretend they were elite, I was the one who actually owned the elite. As the tires of my car gripped the wet asphalt, leaving the Ritz-Carlton behind, I felt a profound sense of peace wash over me. My mother and Chelsea thought their little display of power in the hallway had broken my spirit. What they did not realize was that my empathy for my twin brother had already been completely extinguished earlier that week. My mind drifted back to a phone call I received just 3 days ago. It was a Wednesday evening, and I was sitting in my home office reviewing crisis mitigation strategies for a prominent senator. My phone buzzed on the desk, and Trevon's name flashed across the screen. Normally, my brother never called me unless he needed something. He did not call to ask how my week was going. He certainly did not call to discuss how we might celebrate our shared 30th birthday. I answered the phone, keeping my voice neutral. Maurice, I need a massive favor, Trevon said. The moment the line connected, no greeting, no small talk. Just straight to the demand. I set my pen down. What is it, Trevon? I am finalizing the catering menu for the extravaganza on Saturday, he said, his voice tight with anxiety. And we have a major problem. Chelsea just informed me that her father Richard only drinks a very specific vintage of French Bordeaux. The hotel does not stock it, and the specialty supplier in Buckhead is charging an absolute premium to source it on such short notice. I waited for the punchline, knowing exactly where this was going. Okay, I said slowly. And how does that involve me? I need you to spot me $2,000, Trevon said, rushing the words out as if saying them faster would make the request less absurd. I have already maxed out my primary cards on the ballroom deposit, and that ridiculous cake Mom insisted on. I just need you to transfer the cash to my account tonight so I can secure the wine. I sat in my expensive, ergonomic chair staring at the wall. My twin brother, who regularly mocked my supposedly struggling freelance business, was calling to demand $2,000 so he could impress his wealthy white father-in-law with fermented grape juice. Trevon, I said, keeping my voice perfectly even, you are asking me to give you $2,000 for wine. You know my business is just me consulting. Why on earth would you think I have that kind of disposable income sitting around to fund your party? Because you are my sister Amaris. He snapped, his tone instantly shifting from desperate to condescending. You do not have a mortgage in a gated community like I do. You do not have the overhead of maintaining an elite lifestyle. You just sit at your desk all day. Put it on a credit card if you have to. I closed my eyes, taking a slow breath. He was asking me to go into debt for his ego. Put it on a credit card, I repeated. Yes, he insisted, his voice dripping with irritation. Listen to me, Amaris. You do not understand the pressure I am under. Chelsea comes from a legacy family. Her people have been sitting on corporate boards for generations. I am a black man trying to break into the absolute highest tier of executive leadership. Do you know how hard it is for us? We have to be twice as good just to get a seat at the table. He was weaponizing our race and the very real struggles of corporate America to justify his reckless financial decisions. He was using the concept of black excellence as a shield for his own shallow insecurities. I cannot look like some broke guy who cannot even provide his father-in-law with a proper glass of wine. Trevon continued, his voice rising. This is about our family image. I am elevating the Washington name. I am building generational wealth. You need to sacrifice a little to support your brother's rise. When I make vice president, it benefits all of us. You have to play your part. My part? I echoed. You mean playing the silent, supportive sister while you drain your bank accounts to pretend you are a billionaire? Do not give me that attitude, Trevon growled. Chelsea warned me. You would be difficult about this, she said. You always act bitter because you do not have the drive to succeed in the real corporate world. I am giving you a chance to actually contribute something meaningful to this family. For once, do not embarrass me, Amaris. Just send the money. The sheer audacity of his words hung in the silence between us. He was quoting his racist, elitist wife to put me down while simultaneously begging for my money. He genuinely believed his pursuit of a hollow title made him superior. He genuinely believed I was a failure, who should be grateful for the opportunity to fund his delusion. I did not tell him that I already had generational wealth. I did not tell him that my public relations firm generated more revenue in a single month than he made in 5 years. I did not tell him that the very executives he was trying to impress were currently on my payroll. I cannot help you, Trevon, I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper. I am not going into debt to buy wine for a man who does not even respect you. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. You are useless. He spat the vitriol in his voice, making my stomach turn. You have always been completely useless. Do not even bother showing your face at the party on Saturday. We do not need your peasant energy dragging down the vibe. He hung up before I could say another word. The memory faded as I navigated my car through the slick downtown streets. That phone call was the moment I realized my brother was too far gone. He had sold his soul for a seat at a table that I actually owned. He had chosen Chelsea's toxic elitism over his own flesh and blood. As I accelerated toward the highway, leaving the Ritz-Carlton far behind me, I felt no guilt for what I was about to do. They had demanded a sacrifice for the sake of the family image. Tonight they were going to get exactly what they asked for. I pulled out my phone again and pressed the speed dial for my assistant. The night was still young and my true birthday celebration was just beginning. That phone call was not the end of their audacity. Just one day after Trevon had screamed at me over the wine money, I received a text from my father, Jerome, telling me I needed to come to the house immediately for an urgent family meeting. My parents lived in a sprawling house in the suburbs, a home they had mortgaged to the hilt just to maintain the illusion of wealth. I should have known better than to go. But a small, foolish part of me thought maybe they were going to intervene and tell Trevon he was out of line. I drove over that Thursday evening exhausted from managing a high-profile scandal for a tech executive, hoping we could just have a normal conversation. When I walked into their living room, the atmosphere was heavy and thick with tension. My father was sitting in his large leather armchair, looking uncomfortable as usual. He was a passive man who spent his entire marriage agreeing with whatever my mother wanted, simply to avoid her wrath. My mother. Brenda stood by the fireplace, her arms crossed defensively, and there, sitting cross-legged on our family sofa, like she was the queen of the manor, was Chelsea. Trevon was noticeably absent, probably out buying a custom tuxedo he could not afford. Sit down, Amaris, my father said, motioning to a stiff accent chair opposite Chelsea. We have a family matter to discuss, and we need your cooperation. I did not sit. I stood my ground, feeling the exhaustion melt away into a cold, defensive alertness. What is going on, Dad? I asked, keeping my voice level. My mother stepped forward, taking control of the room as she always did. Trevon has his 30th birthday party this Saturday. As you well know, he is meeting with the absolute top tier of Atlanta society. Chelsea has graciously invited her father and several of his billionaire associates. Trayvon needs to look immaculate. He needs to look like he belongs in that room. He bought a designer suit, I replied. What more could he possibly need from me? Chelsea let out a small, condescending sigh, as if my ignorance was physically painful to her. A suit is just fabric, Amaris, she said, swirling the ice in her glass of sparkling water. In my father's world, men judge each other by their timepieces, a cheap watch or a flashy new money watch. Screams. Desperation. My father is a prominent collector, and he will notice Trayvon's wrist. The second they shake hands, Trayvon cannot show up wearing that entry-level Rolex he financed last year. It is embarrassing. I stared at her, my mind slowly connecting the dots. They were not going to ask me for money. This time, they were going after something far more valuable. My father cleared his throat, looking down at the carpet instead of at me. Your grandfather's Patek, Felipe Amaris. We need you to go to the bank and retrieve it. Trayvon is going to wear it for the party. The air in the room seemed to freeze. My grandfather had passed away 5 years ago. He was a hard-working man who had saved for decades to buy that vintage Patek Philippe watch. It was his prized possession, the only real piece of generational wealth our family had ever owned when he died. Everyone assumed he would leave it to Trayvon, the golden grandson who carried the family name. But grandfather knew exactly who Trayvon was. He knew Trayvon was reckless, hollow, and obsessed with empty status. In his will, grandfather bypassed my brother entirely and left the watch to me. He told the lawyers I was the only one in the family who understood the true value of time and hard work. My mother had been furious for years over that decision. No, I said, simply refusing to even entertain the thought. The watch is locked in a safety deposit box, and it is staying there. Do not be ridiculous, Amaris. My mother snapped, her voice rising in volume. It is just sitting in the dark, gathering dust. Your brother actually needs it for a critical networking event. It completes his look, and it proves our family has heritage and class. Chelsea uncrossed her legs and leaned forward, looking at me with undisguised pity. Honestly, Amaris, why keep a luxury watch when you will never set foot in elite circles anyway? It is completely wasted on someone like you. You run a struggling freelance gig and live a very quiet life. Trayvon is the one carrying the family legacy into the upper class. You should be eager to help him look the part. Instead of hoarding a status symbol you do not even understand. The sheer venom and entitlement in her voice made my blood boil. Here was a white woman sitting in my black parents' living room telling me that I was not elite enough to wear my own grandfather's watch, and my parents were standing right there letting her disrespect me because they were so desperate for her father's approval. The watch is not a prop for Trayvon to play pretend billionaire, I said, looking directly at Chelsea, and it is certainly not a tool to trick your father into thinking my brother is something he is not. How dare you! My father yelled suddenly, finding his courage now that the golden boy was being insulted. Your brother is trying to elevate this entire family. He is building a bridge to true wealth, and you are standing in his way over pure spite. You have always been selfish. Amaris always holding grudges because you could not achieve what Trayvon has. You are keeping that watch hostage just to punish him, my mother added, stepping closer to me with genuine hatred in her eyes. You are a bitter, jealous woman. If you do not go to the bank tomorrow and hand that watch over to Chelsea, you are no longer welcome in this house. I looked at the three of them, realizing how pathetic they truly were. They were willing to strip me of my only heirloom, just to impress a room full of people who would never respect them. Anyway, they were willing to cast me out over a piece of metal and glass because their obsession with fake excellence had completely blinded them to reality. I let out a dry, hollow laugh that echoed in the tense living room. You want to talk about elite circles? I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous calm. You want to talk about building bridges to true wealth? You are all pathetic. You are begging for a seat at a table that is already crumbling. Chelsea scoffed, rolling her eyes. You sound insane. Amaris, just leave before you embarrass yourself further. I turned on my heel and walked toward the front door, stopping just as my hand touched the brass handle. I looked back at my parents who were already comforting Chelsea for having to endure my presence. I am not giving you the watch, I said loudly, making sure every word was clear, and I am not giving you another dime. Have a crowded party on Saturday. Let us hope your VIP guests do not have a more important schedule that night. I walked out of the house into the cool evening air. Slamming the door behind me as I drove away from their suburban illusion, my memories snapped back to the present moment on the wet highway that ambush was the final straw. They had drawn the battle lines and told me I was not welcome in their world. It was time to show them that my world was the only one that actually mattered. As I drove through the dark, slick streets of Atlanta, my phone began to vibrate incessantly in the cup holder. The screen lit up with a barrage of text messages from the family group chat. My dramatic exit had apparently enraged them further. Trevon had finally returned home to find his wife and parents fuming over my refusal. He was furious that his perfect prop was denied to him. The messages poured in one after another, each more toxic than the last. My mother typed that I was a bitter spinster who would die alone with my worthless consulting gig. My father called me an ungrateful embarrassment who had completely disgraced the family name in front of Chelsea and Trevon. He sent a voice note screaming that my jealousy over his success was pathetic. He told me I was dead to him if I did not turn my car around, apologize to his wife, and hand over the watch. I listened to the voicemail as the rain tapped against my windshield. I did not feel the urge to cry. I did not feel the crushing weight of rejection that used to paralyze me in my 20s. Instead, I felt an incredibly liberating sense of finality. They had finally said the quiet part out loud. They had severed the ties themselves, believing that casting me out would somehow break me. They genuinely thought I needed them to survive. They thought their suburban approval was the only currency that mattered in this world. I pulled my car over to the side of the road, shifting into park. I picked up my phone and opened the group chat. The vitriol was still flowing. Chelsea had chimed in from Trevon's phone, calling me a classless joke who would never understand what it takes to build a legacy. I stared at the glowing screen, taking in decades of emotional abuse, condensed into a single thread of text messages. For 30 years, I had contorted myself to fit into their narrow definition of success. I had downplayed my intelligence so Trevon could shine. I had hidden my wealth, so my mother would not demand I fund her superficial lifestyle. I had accepted their insults because society teaches us that blood is thicker than water. But blood can also be toxic. It can poison you slowly if you do not cut off the circulation. I typed my final response to the group chat, keeping it as precise and clinical as a legal document. I am officially done playing the scapegoat for this family. Delusion. Do not call me. Do not text me. And absolutely do not expect me to ever save you when your fragile house of cards inevitably collapses. Have a crowded party on Saturday. Let us hope your VIP guests do not have a more important schedule that night. I hit send, and then I blocked every single one of their numbers. My mother, my father, my twin brother, and his unbearable wife. One by one, their digital access to my life was permanently revoked. The silence that filled the car afterward was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I was completely free. I merged back onto the highway, heading straight for the heart of the city. The rain was clearing up, leaving the Atlanta skyline glittering against the night sky. I was no longer the dismissed sister, making delivery runs. I was returning to my true element. 10 minutes later, I pulled into the secure underground parking garage of an ultra-modern glass high-rise in Midtown. The private elevator scanned my fingerprint and whisked me directly to the top floor. The doors slid open silently, revealing the sprawling, pristine expanse of my penthouse office. The polished marble floors gleamed under the ambient lighting. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the empire I had conquered. Discreetly, a sleek reception desk made of dark mahogany stood near the entrance, bearing the subtle silver lettering of my firm Ameris Communications. My executive assistant Jordan was waiting for me near the large conference table, holding a tablet and a thick manila folder. He looked up as I walked in, his expression a mix of professional readiness and genuine loyalty. "You made record time, boss," he said, handing me a glass of aged red wine. The bakery run must have been exceptionally brief. It was highly educational, I replied, taking a sip of the wine, the rich, complex flavor settling my nerves. Jordan, I need to see the cross-referenced lists right now. Jordan nodded and spread the documents across the conference table. He tapped his tablet, bringing up a digital projection on the large monitor on the wall. Here is the complete guest list for Trayvon's birthday event at the Ritz-Carlton, he explained. Navigating through the names, Chelsea and her father Richard went to great lengths to ensure only the highest tier of corporate executives and investors were invited. It is essentially a networking event disguised as a birthday party. I stepped closer to the screen, scanning the names, scrolling past my eyes. Every single person on that list was a titan of industry. Local politicians, tech innovators, real estate moguls, and venture capitalists. It was a room designed to cement Trayvon's promotion to vice president and elevate Chelsea's social standing. Now Jordan said, pressing another button, let us overlay that with our active client roster and the emergency contacts for the gold invitation tier. The screen shifted, highlighting names in bright gold text. I let out a low, satisfying laugh as the results materialized before me. It was even better than I had anticipated. Nearly 90% of the heavyweights Trayvon was desperately trying to impress were individuals whose public images I personally controlled. Look at this. Jordan pointed to a cluster of names at the top of the list. The chief executive officer of Trayvon's company, the entire executive board, and the key investors. They are all currently paying our firm massive monthly retainers. We just killed a devastating investigative piece about the CEO's offshore accounts. Last Tuesday, he considers you his personal savior. And what about Chelsea's father? I asked, tracing the rim of my wine glass. Richard, the billionaire real estate tycoon who thinks I am a struggling freelancer. Jordan chuckled, shaking his head. Richard is our highest-paying client in the crisis division. He has been frantically emailing us all week, begging for a private consultation regarding that looming federal zoning scandal. He would sell his own soul to get a 10-minute meeting with you tonight. I stood in the center of my penthouse, looking at the sprawling web of power illuminated on the screen. My family had banished me from a $24,000 party because they thought I was a nobody. They had no idea that the very people they worshipped, the untouchable elite they groveled before, were terrified of me. I held the keys to their careers, their marriages, and their freedom. Jordan, I said, turning to my assistant, the cold clarity of my plan locking into place. Activate the Hilltop estate. I want the catering, the security, and the valet services scaled to the maximum level. We are hosting the Gold Tier Gala tonight, and I want the invitations sent out immediately. I want the invitations to read that this is a highly confidential gathering for top-tier clients of Amaris Communications. Attendance is strictly invite-only and non-transferable. They need to know that missing this event means missing the most critical networking opportunity of the decade. Jordan's fingers flew across the screen, sending out the digital summons. They are going out now, he confirmed. These executives already cleared their schedules for a party tonight, so they are all dressed and ready. The moment they see your name on the invitation, they will redirect their drivers instantly. No one in their right mind would choose a middle management birthday dinner over an exclusive audience with the woman who controls their public survival. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the city lights far below. Somewhere down there, my mother was probably straightening Trayvon's tie, telling him how proud she was. Somewhere down there, Chelsea was bragging to her friends about her exclusive guest list. They were all living in a fragile bubble of delusion built on my stolen inheritance and their own inflated egos. They had pushed me out, calling me a bitter spinster and a failure. They thought severing ties with me would isolate me from the world. They did not realize they had just isolated themselves. They had drawn the battle lines and handed me the exact weapons I needed to destroy their little charade. I drained the last of my wine and set the glass down on the mahogany desk. Tonight, I was not going to be the quiet sister who took their abuse tonight. I was going to remind the elite of Atlanta exactly who held the power, and tomorrow my family would wake up to a reality they could not gaslight their way out of. Jordan cleared his throat, breaking the silence that had settled over the penthouse office. He walked back over to the conference table and tapped the screen, sorting the list of names into priority tiers. "You know, boss," he said casually, leaning against the leather chair. "I have worked for you for 4 years, and I still find it absolutely fascinating that your own family has zero clue about any of this. They really think you just design brochures and write press releases for local bakeries, do they not?" I walked back to the table looking at the glowing names on the monitor. "They see what they want to see, Jordan," I replied. "My mother needed a failure to make my brother look like a triumph, so I let her have her illusion while I built reality. It was easier that way. Privacy is the ultimate luxury in this business." It was true. When I started Amara's Communications, I was operating out of a tiny studio apartment with nothing but a laptop and a relentless drive. I had seen how my parents worshipped the loud, flashy kind of wealth, the kind that buys $24,000 parties, but crumbles the second a bank calls in a loan. I realized very early on that true power does not shout it, whispers. It operates in the shadows, pulling the strings that make the puppets dance. I focused on crisis management because the elite are reckless. They are arrogant and they make mistakes. When a billionaire makes a mistake, he does not need a flashy billboard. He needs a ghost. He needs someone who can make the problem disappear before the morning news cycle picks it up. I became that ghost. Jordan handed me a thick physical dossier stamped with a red confidential seal. "Let us look at the guest of honor for Trayvon's little networking event," he said. "Richard Chelsea's father, real estate tycoon, and currently our most desperate client." I opened the file, tracing the printed lines with my index finger. Richard was the man my family treated like a deity. My parents had practically remodeled their entire personalities just to be acceptable in his presence. Trayvon had drained his bank accounts to buy vintage Bordeaux, specifically to whet Richard's palate. What they did not know was that Richard was currently facing a massive federal zoning investigation. He had bribed several city officials to secure land for his new commercial development, and a whistleblower was preparing to leak the documents to the press. For the past month, Richard had been sitting in this exact penthouse crying actual tears, while begging me to leverage my media contacts to kill the story. He was terrified that his legacy would be destroyed, and he was paying my firm an exorbitant monthly retainer just to keep his name out of the papers. And yet I murmured, flipping the page. His white daughter Chelsea stood in the hallway of the Ritz-Carlton 2 hours ago and told me I was not elite enough to breathe the same air as her father. She said I would embarrass him. Jordan let out a sharp laugh. "The irony is almost painful. If you made one phone call right now, Richard would lose his company, his fortune, and probably his freedom. Your brother is buying him wine while you are holding his entire life in the palm of your hand." I closed the file, setting it back on the table. "And what about Trayvon's chief executive officer, the man who holds the keys to his precious promotion to vice president?" Jordan pulled up another profile on the screen. "Donovan Pierce, CEO of Apex Holdings, another one of our top-tier retainers." Mr. Pierce had a rather messy situation last quarter, involving misappropriated corporate funds and a highly illegal offshore account. We managed to scrub the internet clean and rebrand him as a champion of corporate ethics. He owes us his entire reputation. I nodded slowly, visualizing the exact layout of the ballroom at the Ritz-Carlton. Trayvon was probably standing near the entrance right now, adjusting his tie, rehearsing his elevator pitch. He was ready to bow down and worship. Donovan Pierce praying for a scrap of recognition. He was hoping that spending $24,000 of our parents' money would magically transform him into an equal. He did not understand that executives like Donovan Pierce do not respect people who grovel. They only respect leverage, and I was the only person in the city who had it. "We are not just sending out digital invitations," Jordan, I instructed. "I want the physical gold cards couriered directly to their current locations right now. I want my signature embossed on the front. Make sure the couriers hand them directly to the targets." No assistants, no intermediaries. Jordan nodded furiously, typing the orders into his tablet. The courier team is on standby. They will dispatch immediately. The gold cards are already prepped. In the world of ultra-high net worth individuals, the gold card from Ameris Communications was a myth, a legend. It was an unwritten rule that if you received one, you dropped everything you were doing. You did not ask questions. You did not check your schedule. You attended the event because receiving the card meant I had something crucial to discuss regarding your public survival. It was a velvet-covered threat, and they all knew it. As Jordan coordinated the logistics, I walked into my private dressing room attached to the office. My assistant had already arranged my wardrobe for the night. I bypassed the practical blazers and muted tones I usually wore for client meetings. Tonight, I was not hiding behind the desk. Tonight, I was stepping into the light. I chose a breathtaking floor-length gown made of deep midnight blue silk. It was sleek, powerful, and commanded absolute attention without needing to be loud. I paired it with a single diamond pendant necklace, a piece I had purchased for myself after closing my first $1 million deal. I pinned my hair up into an elegant structured style and applied a bold red lip. When I stepped back out into the office, Jordan actually paused his typing to stare. "Boss," he said, a slow grin spreading across his face. "They are not going to know what hit them." "That is the point," I replied. Picking up my clutch, "Is the Hilltop Estate ready, fully staffed and operational?" He confirmed the catering team has prepared a 5-star menu, the string quartet is setting up, and the security detail has locked down the perimeter. The valets are ready to receive the guests. "Excellent," I said, walking toward the private elevator. "Let us go. Host a birthday party." The ride down to the private garage was silent. Jordan walked half a step behind me, his tablet glowing in the dim light of the elevator cabin as he tracked the real-time movements of our courier team. My personal driver was waiting beside the sleek black Maybach, the engine already purring a soft greeting as the door swung open. We glided out of the parking structure and merged onto the highway heading north toward the exclusive Buckhead district. The Hilltop Estate was a property I had acquired 2 years ago, specifically for moments like this. It sat on 10 acres of pristine, heavily wooded land, completely invisible from the main road. It was a fortress of luxury designed to offer absolute privacy to individuals whose entire lives were dissected by the public eye. The security gates required biometric clearance to open, and the sweeping driveway was lined with century-old oak trees that blocked any chance of paparazzi long lenses capturing the events inside. As we drove, Jordan read the dispatch updates aloud. "The couriers have breached the downtown perimeter," he said, his voice steady and focused. "Target Alpha, Richard is currently in the lobby of the Ritz-Carlton, surrounded by his personal security target. Beta Donovan Pierce is in the VIP lounge, holding court with Trevon's executive team. The gold cards are moments away from interception." The gold cards were not merely pieces of thick, expensive card stock. They were meticulously crafted instruments of psychological warfare. Each invitation was sealed inside a matte black envelope, bearing only my firm's crest pressed in gold wax. Inside the text was minimal, requesting the immediate presence of the recipient at the Ameris Communications exclusive Client Appreciation Gala. There was no RSVP option. There was no +1 allowance at the very bottom. Printed in an elegant but unforgiving font was a reminder of their signed non-disclosure agreements. In the ultra-rich world, where reputations are built on fragile foundations of public perception, rejecting an invitation from the keeper of secrets is tantamount to PR suicide. These billionaires and executives knew exactly what my firm did for them. We buried their scandals, negotiated their settlements, and crafted their pristine public narratives. An impromptu summons from me meant only one thing to them. A crisis was imminent, and their presence was required to manage it. I leaned back against the plush leather seat of the Maybach, watching the city lights blur past the window. I could easily imagine the scene unfolding at the Ritz-Carlton. Right now, My brother Trevon was likely sweating through his rented tuxedo, hovering near the entrance of the ballroom, waiting for the titans of industry to walk through the doors and validate his pathetic existence. My mother Brenda was probably holding court with the few distant relatives who had arrived early, bragging about how her son was rubbing elbows with billionaires. Chelsea was undoubtedly pacing the floor waiting for her father to arrive so she could parade him around like a trophy. They had planned a $24,000 charade built entirely on the delusion that they belonged to a world they did not even understand. And now I was deploying the one weapon they could never anticipate: leverage. Jordan's tablet chimed a soft melodic sound. "Delivery confirmed," he announced. "Target Alpha has received the envelope." I pictured Richard standing in the opulent lobby of the Ritz-Carlton, a glass of expensive bourbon in his hand, playing the role of the untouchable real estate tycoon. A man in a tailored black suit would approach him, bypassing his bodyguards with the smooth authority of someone who represents a higher power. The courier would hand him the black envelope. Richard would break the gold wax seal, slide out the heavy metal card, and read my name. His heart would drop into his stomach. The arrogant smirk would melt off his face as the realization hit him. The woman who was currently hiding his federal zoning scandal from the press wanted to see him immediately at a private estate on the other side of town. "Delivery confirmed for Target Beta," Jordan continued, his fingers swiping across the screen. "Donovan Pierce has the card, Trevon's precious chief executive officer." The man holding the keys to my brother's desperately desired promotion to vice president was now looking at the exact same gold card. Donovan Pierce owed his entire career survival to my firm's ability to erase his offshore account. Embezzlement from the internet. A summons from Ameris Communications would trigger a primal panic in a man like that. He would drop whatever conversation he was having. He would abandon his drink, and he would order his driver to bring the car around instantly. A middle management birthday party would not even register as an afterthought in his mind. One by one, the confirmations rolled in. Every politician, every tech innovator, every venture capitalist that Trevon had begged and borrowed to invite was receiving my gold card. They were standing in the very hotel where my brother was waiting for them, but they were turning around and walking right back out the doors. The beauty of this trap was its absolute silence. There would be no dramatic scenes in the hotel lobby, no shouting matches, no explanations. These men and women operated in a world of strict discretion. They would simply make an excuse to their companions, whisper a harsh command to their security details, and exit the building as swiftly as possible. Trevon would never even know they had been there. We arrived at the Hilltop Estate, the heavy iron gates swinging open to grant us entry. The property was breathtaking in the night, illuminated by soft amber lighting that highlighted the classic architecture of the mansion. A fleet of valets stood at attention near the entrance, perfectly synchronized and ready to receive the incoming convoy of luxury vehicles. I stepped out of the Maybach, the cool night air sending a thrill of anticipation down my spine. The doors to the mansion were open, revealing a foyer dripping with elegance. The string quartet was already playing a hauntingly beautiful melody that echoed through the grand halls. The catering staff moved with invisible precision, carrying trays of champagne and caviar. The estate was a testament to everything I had built in absolute secrecy. The walls were lined with original art. The crystal chandeliers cast a warm, inviting glow over the custom furniture. My parents had mortgaged their home to rent a hotel ballroom for a few hours. I owned this fortress, outright paid for with the very crisis management skills they constantly belittled. Today was my 30th birthday, too. My mother had ordered me to fetch a cake and stay out of sight, but standing in the center of this magnificent hall, surrounded by the quiet hum of professional staff, executing my exact vision, I felt no lingering sorrow. The little girl who used to crave her parents' approval had died a long time ago, replaced by the woman who now commanded the very people her family worshipped. Jordan checked his tablet once more. "The perimeter sensors are picking up the first vehicles, boss," he announced, looking up with a razor-sharp smile. "It looks like a parade of Bentleys and Rolls-Royces making their way up the hill. They are moving fast. They are terrified," I corrected him softly, walking toward the main reception hall. They know that when the Keeper of Secrets calls a meeting, the only safe place to be is inside the room. Let us go. Welcome our guests, Jordan. Let us go. Welcome our guests, Jordan. Across town, in the gilded lobby of the Ritz-Carlton, Richard was checking his watch for the third time in 10 minutes. Chelsea's billionaire father stood near the entrance of the grand ballroom, holding a glass of expensive bourbon and feeling profoundly irritated. He had only agreed to attend this birthday dinner to humor his daughter, who insisted her husband was on the verge of joining the corporate elite. Richard despised networking with middle management climbers like Trayvon. He found them desperate and exhausting as he took a sip of his drink, preparing to fake a smile for the evening. A man in a tailored black suit materialized beside him, slipping past Richard's private security detail with terrifying ease. The man did not speak. He simply extended a thick, matte black envelope bearing a gold wax seal. Richard frowned but took it, recognizing the weight and texture of the paper. His bodyguards tensed, ready to intervene, but Richard waved them off. He broke the gold seal and slid out a heavy metal card, the moment his eyes registered the embossed name. Amaris Communications. The color drained entirely from his face. The federal zoning investigation, the bribed city officials, the whistleblower, all of it flashed through Richard's mind like a nightmare. He had paid Amaris millions to bury those secrets to keep his legacy from turning to ash. If she was summoning him tonight unannounced, it meant the fragile dam holding back his ruin was cracking. Richard did not think about Chelsea. He did not think about Trayvon or the $24,000 party waiting just beyond the doors. He turned to his lead bodyguard and spoke in a tight, urgent whisper. "Get the car right now, we are leaving." A few yards away, inside the lavishly decorated ballroom, Donovan Pierce was nursing a scotch. The chief executive officer of Apex Holdings was the grand prize of the night. The man Trayvon had built this entire charade to impress. Donovan was casually leaning against a high-top table, watching Trayvon wade through the sparse crowd toward him. Trayvon was sweating, smiling too broadly, straightening his tie, preparing to pitch himself for the vice president position before Trayvon could even open his mouth to offer his rehearsed greeting. A courier stepped directly into Donovan's path. Another black envelope, another gold wax seal. Donovan took it with a look of mild annoyance that instantly transformed into raw panic. When he saw the sender's name, his hand actually trembled. His mind raced back to the offshore accounts, the embezzled corporate funds, the illegal wire transfers Amaris had saved him from federal prison just last quarter. An emergency summons from her was a matter of corporate life and death. Donovan did not even acknowledge Trayvon, who was now standing less than 5 feet away, with his hand outstretched for a handshake. Donovan simply turned his back, set his scotch down on a passing waiter's tray, and marched briskly toward the exit, his security team trailing closely behind him. Trayvon stood there, his hand suspended in midair, his smile faltering as he watched the most important guest of the evening walk right out the door without a single word. This silent exodus was repeating itself all across the hotel lobby. The local politicians, the venture capitalists, the tech innovators. Every single heavy hitter that Chelsea and Trayvon had meticulously vetted and invited was currently receiving a matching black envelope. It was like watching a synchronized wave of terror wash over the wealthiest people in Atlanta. They opened the envelopes, read the gold lettering, and immediately aborted their plans. There were no polite farewells. There were no apologies to the host. The ultra-rich do not explain themselves when their survival is on the line. They simply vanish. Within a span of 15 minutes, the entire roster of elite guests executed a flawless retreat, leaving the Ritz-Carlton in a flurry of hushed commands and frantic footsteps. Outside the hotel, the valet stand descended into absolute chaos. Attendants scrambled in the pouring rain, running to retrieve Bentleys, Maybachs, and armored Escalades that they had just parked. Moments ago, tires screeched against the wet pavement as drivers rushed to navigate their panicked bosses away from the downtown area and toward the secluded perimeter of Buckhead. No one dared to ignore the summons. In their world, ignoring a gold card from the Keeper of Secrets was professional suicide. You do not slight the woman who holds the evidence of your darkest sins. You drop everything. You bow your head, and you go exactly where she tells you to go. Back inside the sprawling ballroom, the atmosphere was growing incredibly tense. The massive LED sign still flashed its proud message, welcoming guests to Trayvon's elite era. But the room was undeniably hollow. The tables adorned with imported floral centerpieces and crystal glassware sat completely empty except for a handful of distant relatives and a few of Trayvon's low-level co-workers who looked around with growing confusion. The waiters stood idle by the walls holding trays of gourmet appetizers that no one was eating. Trevon pulled out his phone, his hands slick with sweat. He dialed Donovan's number, but it went straight to a sterile automated voicemail. He tried texting Richard, asking if he was lost trying to find the ballroom, but the messages were left unread. Panic began to claw at Trevon's chest as he realized his carefully constructed illusion of status was evaporating right in front of him. He did not know that his precious VIPs were currently speeding through the rain, racing each other to reach a hilltop estate. They were terrified, desperate, and entirely at my mercy. They were rushing to bow before the very sister he had banished from his life just hours prior, because he thought she was not elite enough to exist in his presence. And as the rain washed over the city, my golden trap snapped shut around them all, capturing the kings and queens of Atlanta. In a web they could never escape, leaving my brother completely abandoned in his expensive, empty rented room. I stepped away from the grand entrance of the hilltop estate and retreated into the private master suite overlooking the main reception hall. The heavy mahogany doors closed behind me, muting the sound of the string quartet playing below. I walked over to the velvet chaise lounge, poured myself a glass of vintage red wine, and finally picked up my personal phone, which had been buzzing relentlessly in my clutch for the past 2 hours. I unlocked the screen and opened the family group chat. The sheer volume of messages was staggering. They had not blocked me from this specific thread, apparently keeping me in it purely for the sport of psychological torture. Trevon had been treating the group chat like his own personal broadcasting network, incessantly documenting every single moment leading up to his supposed triumph. The messages started rolling in around 6 o'clock. Trevon sent a picture of himself standing in front of the vanity mirror, adjusting his custom-tailored tuxedo. The caption read 30. Looks good on a future vice president elite era officially activated. My mother Brenda immediately replied with a string of clapping emojis, praising God for blessing her with such a magnificent, successful son. My father Jerome chimed in, telling Trevon that tonight was the night he would secure the family legacy. I scrolled further down, watching the delusion amplify with every passing minute. At 7 o'clock, Chelsea took over Trevon's phone to send a wide-angle shot of the empty ballroom. Before the doors opened, she made sure to capture the massive ice sculpture and the imported floral arrangements. The text beneath it dripped with toxic arrogance. $24,000 of pure class, she wrote. It is a shame. Some people could not elevate their aesthetic enough to make the cut. Tonight, hope you enjoy your tap water and cheap takeout in your lonely little apartment. Amorous. I took a slow sip of my wine, letting the rich, dark liquid coat my tongue. The audacity of her words did not sting. They merely confirmed exactly why I was doing this. By 7:30, the text became a frantic barrage of name-dropping and unearned bravado. Trayvon sent a message claiming that the valet was already backed up with luxury cars. He typed out a meticulous list of the corporate titans who had supposedly confirmed their attendance via their assistants. Donovan Pierce is going to lose his mind when he sees the vintage Bordeaux we secured, Trevon bragged in the chat. Richard just texted Chelsea that he is on his way down from his penthouse suite. I am literally minutes away from locking in my promotion. This is the party of the decade. No one does it like us, my mother replied again, her words entirely designed to inflict maximum emotional damage on me. I hope you are reading this, Amaris, she typed. I hope you are paying attention to what real ambition looks like. Your brother is building a bridge to true wealth, while you sit alone in the dark, holding on to your bitter grudges. Maybe if you had supported him and handed over your grandfather's watch, you could have stood in the background and witnessed history. Instead, you chose to be a jealous failure. I stared at the glowing screen, reading the barrage of insults from the people who shared my blood. They were completely intoxicated by their own fabricated reality. They genuinely believed they were sitting on top of the world, untouchable and triumphant. They were mocking my sad, lonely night, imagining me sobbing in a cramped apartment, utterly devastated by my exclusion from their high society gathering. I did not type a single word in response. I did not need to defend myself. I did not need to hurl insults back at them or justify my existence. The need to seek their validation had been surgically removed from my soul. I just sat there in the quiet luxury of my estate, swirling the red wine in my crystal glass and watching the digital timestamps on their messages. The last message from Trevon had come in exactly at 8:00. It was a blurry photo of Donovan Pierce walking into the lobby. The caption read, "The king has arrived. It is time to make my move." That was 45 minutes ago. Since then, the family group chat had gone absolutely dead silent. There were no more triumphant photos of Chelsea clinking champagne glasses with billionaires. There were no more boastful updates from my mother about rubbing elbows with old money politicians. There were no more arrogant declarations from Trayvon about securing his vice president title. The digital parade of black excellence had come to a grinding, screeching halt. I smiled, resting my head against the velvet cushions. I knew exactly why the chat had gone dark 45 minutes ago, was the exact moment my courier handed Donovan Pierce the gold invitation. 45 minutes ago was when Richard broke the wax seal and realized his public survival was hanging by a thread. It was the exact moment the entire roster of elite guests aborted. The party turned their backs on my brother and fled the hotel in a synchronized panic. Trevon was likely standing in that cavernous $24,000 ballroom right now, staring at his phone, unable to comprehend why the king had vanished. Before even shaking his hand, he was probably refreshing his inbox, watching his messages to his boss go unread. He was watching the caterers carry untouched trays of expensive hors d'oeuvres past empty tables. The reality of his massive financial and social failure was currently crashing down on him, suffocating him in real time. The dominoes I had so carefully arranged were not just falling. They were obliterating his fragile house of cards. I took another sip of wine, feeling a profound sense of catharsis. The silence from my family was not just the absence of noise. It was the sound of their absolute defeat. They had spent my entire life trying to make me feel small, to convince me I was unworthy of occupying the same space as their golden boy. And now their golden boy was standing completely alone, surrounded by ice sculptures melting into puddles of expensive regret. A soft knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. Jordan stepped into the suite holding his tablet, his eyes bright with adrenaline. "The perimeter is fully secured, boss," he said, his voice a low thrum of excitement. "The guests have all arrived and have been escorted into the main hall. Richard and Donovan are currently pacing near the private bar, asking the staff how soon you will make an appearance. They look like they are about to have simultaneous heart attacks." I set my wine glass down on the side table and stood up, smoothing the midnight blue silk of my gown. "Let them sweat for a few more minutes. Jordan," I instructed the elite, "always need to be reminded that their time is no longer their own. When they are standing in my house." Jordan grinned, tapping his screen. "Understood. Shall I have the string quartet shift to a slightly faster tempo to elevate the tension in the room?" "That would be perfect," I replied, walking past him toward the sweeping staircase that led down to the main floor. My brother had begged for an audience with the gods of Atlanta tonight. He was getting an empty room and a massive bill. I was getting the gods themselves delivered directly to my front door, and they were going to spend the rest of the evening begging me for their salvation. I left the family group chat open on my phone, leaving the device on the velvet lounge chair. I did not need to look at it anymore. The eve of the storm had passed. The hurricane was officially here, And I was the one controlling the weather while I was descending the grand staircase of my hilltop estate. The scene unfolding 15 miles away at the Ritz-Carlton was turning into a masterclass in humiliation. The grand ballroom that my mother had drained her savings to rent was bathed in soft golden light. A massive ice sculpture carved into the shape of the number 30 stood in the center of the room, slowly melting onto a silver tray. A 10-piece band played upbeat jazz in the corner, but there was almost no one there to hear it. Trevon stood near the entrance wearing a custom-tailored tuxedo that he had put on a high-interest credit card he kept pulling at his collar, sweating profusely under the warm lights. Chelsea paced back and forth next to him, draped in a couture emerald gown that was meant to dazzle the wives of billionaires. Her diamond necklace sparkled, but her face was twisted into a mask of pure panic. My mother Brenda and my father Jerome hovered near the empty VIP tables. They had spent the first hour of the evening bragging to a handful of distant cousins and low-level co-workers about how Donovan Pierce was going to walk through the doors. Any second, they had proudly pointed out the reserved seating cards bearing the names of Atlanta's absolute elite. But as the clock struck 8 and then crept slowly toward 8:30, the bragging had stopped. The ballroom was a ghost town out of the 200 guests they had anticipated. Perhaps 20 had actually shown up, and none of them were the people Trevon needed to see. They were just aunts and uncles who had driven in from the suburbs, eating the expensive appetizers and looking around the cavernous empty room. With growing discomfort, the catering staff stood by the walls, holding silver trays of untouched caviar and truffles, exchanging awkward glances with one another. By 9 o'clock, the reality of the situation was impossible to ignore. Trevon retreated to a quiet corner near the service doors. His hands shaking as he pulled out his phone, he dialed Donovan Pierce first, pressing the phone to his ear and holding his breath. He was met with the sterile, automated voice of an executive assistant stating that Mr. Pierce was unavailable for the remainder of the evening. He tried calling the other board members, the tech investors, the local politicians. Every single call went straight to voicemail. Chelsea cornered him, her perfectly manicured hands trembling with rage. "Where is my father, Trevon?" she hissed, keeping her voice low so the few guests present would not hear you. "Told me you confirmed his attendance 3 times this week. I invited my sorority sisters to this party to show off my husband, rubbing elbows with my father's inner circle. And now I am standing in an empty room looking like an absolute fool." Trevon wiped the sweat from his forehead, his eyes darting frantically around the empty ballroom. "I do not understand, Chelsea," he stammered, his voice cracking with desperation. "They were in the lobby. I saw Donovan walk in with my own eyes. I sent a picture to the group chat. They were here. And then they just vanished. Maybe there was a corporate emergency. Maybe there is a crisis at the firm." My mother marched over to them, refusing to accept the catastrophic failure unfolding around her. "Trevon, honey," she said, forcing a tight, unnatural smile. "They are probably just running late. You know how these important men are. They operate on their own schedules. Tell the band to keep playing. We will just delay the cake cutting until the VIP tables are full." But the tables remained empty. The vintage French Bordeaux that Trevon had begged me to fund sat unopened on the bar. The expensive red velvet cake with gold flakes remained hidden in the kitchen. There was no networking. There was no promotion being secured. There was only the deafening silence of a $24,000 mistake. The distant relatives who had shown up were beginning to whisper among themselves. Cousin Marcus, who Trevon had openly mocked at Thanksgiving for driving a used car, was now openly staring at the empty VIP tables and snickering behind his glass of champagne. Aunt Vivian was loudly complaining about the lack of atmosphere, asking my mother why they had rented such a massive room for a family gathering that could have fit in a backyard. My mother was spiraling into a state of deep denial. She began physically moving the place cards, attempting to consolidate the few guests into a tighter cluster near the front to make the room look less abandoned. She commanded the waitstaff to start pouring the expensive wine, hoping that free-flowing alcohol would distract the relatives from the glaring absence of the elite guests, but it was a futile effort. The sheer scale of the Ritz-Carlton ballroom only magnified their isolation. Jerome. My father stood by the bar quietly drinking. He had co-signed the loan for this party, staking his own fragile financial security on Trayvon's promise that this night would yield a massive return on investment. He watched his golden boy sweating in the corner, holding his phone like a lifeline that had been cut, and for the first time, the illusion of his son's corporate supremacy began to fracture. Chelsea was practically vibrating with humiliation. Her phone was blowing up with texts from her wealthy friends who had opted to attend other social events, asking her for pictures of the grand gala she had been bragging about for months. She had nothing to send them. She could not post a picture of Trayvon standing next to an uncle who worked at a hardware store. She needed billionaires. She needed her father Richard to validate her choice of husband to her elite social circle. "Where is my father, Trayvon?" she demanded again, her voice rising above the polite jazz music playing in the background. "He promised me he would make an appearance. He was supposed to introduce you to the board of directors. You promised me. This was your night. You promised me you were stepping into the inner circle." Trayvon felt the walls closing in. He pulled his bow tie loose, the restrictive fabric suddenly making it hard to breathe. "I am trying, Chelsea," he pleaded, dialing another number, his fingers slipping on the glass screen of his phone. "Their assistants are blocking my calls. The executives are not answering emails. It makes no sense." Donovan was literally in the lobby. I saw his security detail. He looked down at his phone, opening the family group chat. The last message was still his own. Boastful photo of Donovan Pierce in the lobby, followed by my mother's cruel jabs at my expense. He stared at my silence in the chat, his mind grasping for any logical explanation for the sudden abandonment of his entire professional network. He had done everything right. He had spent the money, he had bought the right clothes, he had rented the right venue. He had even cast out his embarrassing sister to ensure the aesthetic was perfectly curated for the white gaze of corporate America. Yet here he was standing in a $24,000 void. The ice sculpture continued to melt, dripping steadily onto the silver platter, a ticking clock counting down the seconds of his total social and professional ruin. The elite had not just failed to show up, they had actively fled. And as the clock ticked past 9:15, Trayvon finally realized that no one was coming to save him. The party of the decade was nothing but an incredibly expensive funeral for his career. 15 miles away, the atmosphere could not have been more different. My hilltop estate was practically vibrating with the concentrated energy of absolute power. The sweeping circular driveway was jammed with a fleet of custom Maybachs, sleek Bugattis, and heavily armored SUVs. The valet team moved with military precision, opening doors for the most influential figures in the state as they hurried out of the rain and into the warmth of my foyer. Inside the mansion, the air smelled of rare orchids and wealth. The string quartet shifted their melody perfectly, timing the crescendo as I reached the bottom of the grand mahogany staircase. The low hum of urgent conversation immediately ceased. Heads turned. Glasses paused in midair. The titans of Atlanta, the untouchable billionaires and ruthless corporate sharks stopped whatever they were doing to look at me. I did not wear a name tag. I did not have a flashy LED sign announcing my presence. I simply stood there in my midnight blue silk gown, the diamond pendant resting against my collarbone, and commanded the entire room without uttering a single word. A path naturally cleared for me as I stepped onto the main floor. Jordan walked slightly behind me, his tablet in hand acting as my silent sentinel. These were people who normally demanded that others bow to them. Yet here in my house, they eagerly stepped aside. They looked at me with a mixture of profound reverence and raw terror. I was the keeper of their secrets, the architect of their public survival. I glided through the crowd, nodding gracefully to a state senator whose career I had salvaged last spring, smiling politely at a tech innovator whose offshore tax scandal I had buried in a mountain of legal red tape. Everywhere I looked, I saw the faces of the men and women Trayvon had placed on his pathetic vision board. These were his idols, the people he thought would validate his existence if he just bought them the right glass of wine. Donovan Pierce. The chief executive officer of Trevon's company was standing near the custom ice bar, clutching a glass of scotch. He looked nothing like the arrogant corporate titan who ruled over my brother's office. He looked relieved, almost desperate. As I approached him, he quickly set his drink down and offered a deep, respectful nod. "Amorous," he said, his voice lacking its usual booming authority. "Thank God you called us all here. I was at a tedious event downtown when your gold card arrived. I immediately redirected my security team to bring me here. Is there a breach in our media containment?" I offered him a cool, reassuring smile. "There is no breach, Donovan," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly measured. "Your reputation is entirely secure. Tonight is simply an appreciation gala, a reminder of how closely our interests are aligned. I just wanted my most valued clients in one room to celebrate my 30th birthday." The tension visibly drained from Donovan's shoulders. He let out a long breath of relief, pressing a hand to his chest. "Happy birthday, Amaris," he said, genuinely humbled. "Whatever you need from Apex Holdings, you have it. My entire executive board is here tonight. We are at your disposal." I thanked him and continued my walk across the room, moving deliberately toward the east wing of the Grand Hall. Standing near a massive bay window looking out at the rain-slicked gardens was Richard Chelsea's father. The billionaire real estate tycoon was sweating through his bespoke suit. He was pacing back and forth furiously, tapping his phone, oblivious to the beautiful string music filling the air. When Richard saw me approaching, he practically shoved past a local politician to reach me. "Amaris!" he gasped, his voice tight with panic. "Amaris, please tell me you stopped the leak. The federal zoning documents my lawyers are saying. The whistleblower has already contacted 3 major news networks. I cannot let this story run. It will destroy my legacy. It will tank the company's stock before the quarter even ends." This was the man Chelsea claimed I was too unrefined to meet. This was the titan of industry my family had ambushed me over, demanding I surrender my grandfather's watch just so Trevon could look acceptable in his presence. And here he was standing in my house, practically begging on his hands and knees for my mercy. "Richard," I said, my voice dropping to a smooth, professional whisper. "Calm down. You are making a scene in my home, and panic is very bad for your aesthetic." He swallowed hard, wiping his forehead with a silk handkerchief. "I am sorry," he stammered. "I just left my daughter's husband's birthday dinner the second your courier found me. They were waiting for me to arrive, but I did not even speak to them. I just ran when I saw your gold seal. I will double your monthly retainer, Amaris. I will triple it. Just make the federal investigation disappear, please. You are the only one who can fix this." I looked at him, letting the silence stretch, letting him feel the full weight of his dependence on me. Chelsea thought her father was a king, but in this room he was just another desperate man writing blank checks to save his own skin. "Your retainer is fine as it is, Richard," I finally said, signaling to Jordan, who stepped forward with a digital contract. "I have already deployed my media contacts. The news networks will drop the whistleblower story by midnight. We found leverage on the journalist assigned to the piece. The zoning scandal will be buried under a mountain of carefully manufactured distraction. You just need to sign this authorization allowing us to act on your behalf." Richard nearly snatched the digital pen from Jordan's hand, scrawling his signature across the tablet screen with frantic relief. "Thank you," he breathed out, leaning heavily against the window frame. "I owe you my life, Amaris. You are a miracle worker." I took a step back, surveying the room full of elite clients pledging their absolute loyalty to me. My family had told me I would never set foot in elite circles. They were right. I did not just set foot in them, I owned them. The contrast between Trayvon's empty $24,000 ballroom and my mansion overflowing with genuine terrified power was the sweetest birthday gift I could have ever received. I turned back to Jordan, who was reviewing the signed contract on his screen. "Have the photographer get ready," I whispered. "It is time to capture a few memories for the family album." Jordan nodded, stepping back into the crowd with a subtle gesture to our lead event photographer. a brilliant young artist who knew exactly how to capture the subtle dynamics of power without ever being intrusive. A slight look was all it took. The photographer began maneuvering through the room, adjusting his lenses, finding the perfect angle near the grand bay window, where Richard and I were still standing. I watched as Donovan Pierce, having recovered his composure after his earlier panic, made his way across the marble floor toward us. When Donovan locked eyes with Richard, a brief flash of mutual understanding passed between the two corporate titans. They were both incredibly wealthy, incredibly influential, and currently sharing the exact same terrifying vulnerability. They were both standing in my fortress because they had nowhere else to hide, Richard Donovan said, extending a hand to the real estate mogul. I did not expect to see you here tonight. I thought you were tied up at some dreadful family obligation downtown. Richard shook Donovan's hand, letting out a dry, humorless chuckle. Family obligations take a back seat when Amaris sends a gold card. Donovan, you know how it is. A summons from our gracious host is the only appointment that truly matters. Besides, my son-in-law was hosting a rather uninspired birthday dinner. The company here is vastly superior. The irony of Richard's words was like a fine dessert he was openly dismissing. My twin brother's $24,000 party. As an uninspired dinner, completely unaware that he was complaining about Trayvon. To Trayvon's own sister. Donovan laughed in agreement, completely oblivious to the familial connection. They were just two powerful men, bonding over their shared submission to a woman they believed was entirely outside of their social sphere. Jordan materialized beside us, holding a polished silver tray resting on the velvet surface. Were 3 crystal flutes filled with a rare vintage champagne that cost more per bottle than my brother had spent on his entire catering budget. For the Ritz-Carlton, a toast, Jordan suggested smoothly, offering the glasses first to Donovan and Richard, then presenting the final flute to me to celebrate the 30th birthday of the woman who keeps Atlanta standing. Richard took his glass with trembling eagerness, still riding the adrenaline high of knowing his federal zoning scandal had just been erased. Donovan raised his flute, his eyes locking onto mine with an expression of pure, unadulterated reverence. To Amaris. Donovan said, his voice carrying the deep resonance of a man used to commanding boardrooms in a city full of kings. You are the only absolute monarch we recognize. Thank you for your guidance, your discretion, and your unparalleled brilliance. Happy birthday. Richard immediately raised his glass higher, eager, not to be outdone by his peer, to the keeper of our legacies. Richard added, his voice thick with genuine emotion. Without you, we are nothing but targets. May your reign be long and unquestioned. I looked at the two of them. These were the men my family treated as deities. These were the men my mother and father had literally sacrificed my emotional well-being to impress. They had cast me out, called me a bitter spinster, and demanded I hand over my grandfather's heirloom watch, just so Trayvon could spend 5 minutes in their presence. And here they were, standing in my living room, looking at me as if I held the very oxygen they needed to breathe. I raised my crystal flute to meet theirs, to knowing exactly where we belong, I said softly. My words laced with a double meaning they could never possibly comprehend. As the 3 glasses converged in the center, clinking together with a clear melodic chime, I saw the photographer position himself perfectly out of the corner of my eye. The lighting from the antique chandelier above cast a warm golden halo over the scene. At that exact fraction of a second, instinct and hierarchy took over both Donovan Pierce and Richard. Subconsciously dipped their shoulders. They lowered their chins, dipping their heads in a micro-expression of absolute submission as their glasses touched mine. I remained perfectly straight, my posture commanding my midnight blue gown, catching the light as I looked down at them with a serene, untouchable smile. The camera flash fired a soft, brilliant burst of white light that immortalized the moment. Forever. I did not need to look at the digital preview on the camera screen to know the shot was an absolute masterpiece. It was the visual embodiment of true power. It was an undeniable, irrefutable document, proving exactly who ruled the upper echelons of this city. 2 billionaires bowing their heads to a black woman they paid to clean up their messes. I took a sip of the champagne, the crisp, expensive bubbles dancing on my tongue. Richard and Donovan drank deeply, their faces relaxed. The heavy burdens of their respective scandals lifted from their shoulders. They began to chat amicably between themselves, discussing market trends and golf courses completely at ease. Now that they knew they were under my protection, I stepped back, leaving them to their conversation, and motioned for Jordan to follow me into the adjacent corridor, away from the noise of the main hall. "Did we get it?" I asked, keeping my voice low. Jordan grinned, pulling up his tablet and syncing it with the photographer's feed. He turned the screen toward me. "It is the most lethal photograph I have ever seen, boss." I looked at the image. It was stunning. The framing was immaculate, capturing the opulence of the estate in the background, but the focus was entirely on the power dynamic. Richard and Donovan looked like loyal subjects, paying tribute to an empress. The contrast was devastating. "Push it to the firm private social media account," I instructed. "Do not tag them. Do not use any aggressive captions. Just a simple thank you to our esteemed clients for celebrating 30 years of excellence with us tonight. Keep it elegant. Keep it corporate." Jordan's smile widened into something downright wicked, sending it out. "Now you know. Chelsea entire network follows our corporate page, hoping to catch glimpses of our client list. Trayvon mid-level managers follow us too, pretending they understand high-level public relations." "I know," I replied, turning my gaze back toward the grand hall. "That is exactly the point. The truth is a very heavy thing, Jordan, and tonight I am dropping it right on their heads." 15 miles away inside the cavernous and humiliatingly empty ballroom at the Ritz-Carlton, the remaining shreds of Trayvon's dignity were rapidly disintegrating. The 10-piece jazz band had mercifully stopped playing, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence in their wake. The majestic ice sculpture had completely melted into a sad puddle on its silver tray, reflecting the harsh reality of a $24,000 disaster. Chelsea was no longer attempting to maintain her poised, wealthy exterior. She was pacing furiously near the entrance of the ballroom, her emerald green gown swishing aggressively around her ankles. Her face was flushed red with absolute rage, and she was pointing a manicured finger directly at Trayvon's chest. "You lied to me, Trayvon," she hissed, her voice echoing loudly in the empty space. "You promised me this was your night. You swore my father was coming, and that Donovan Pierce was going to hand you that vice president title on a silver platter. I invited my friends to witness my husband stepping into the inner circle, and instead, I am standing in an empty room looking like an absolute joke." Trayvon was visibly trembling. He tugged at the collar of his expensive rented tuxedo, pulling it loose as if the fabric was literally choking him. He looked frantically at his parents, who were sitting at an empty VIP table, staring blankly at the untouched lobster appetizers. My mother Brenda had completely lost her arrogant swagger. She sat slumped in her chair, the realization that her golden boy had failed spectacularly, finally settling over her. "I do not understand." "Chelsea," Trayvon stammered, his voice cracking with pure desperation. "I confirmed their attendance. They were in the lobby. I saw Donovan with my own eyes. Something must have happened. A corporate emergency, a lockdown. There is no other explanation for why they would all vanish at the exact same time." A few feet away, near the extravagant and entirely untouched open bar, stood a handful of Trayvon's low-level co-workers. They had only been invited to fill space and serve as an audience for his anticipated triumph. One of them, a junior analyst named Kevin, was leaning against the marble counter, bored out of his mind and mindlessly scrolling through Instagram on his phone. Kevin followed all the major corporate pages in Atlanta, hoping to glean some networking insights. He casually refreshed his feed and paused, his thumb hovering over a newly posted high-definition photograph. The image stopped him dead in his tracks. He blinked, leaning closer to the screen, adjusting the brightness to make sure his eyes were not deceiving him. "Hey, Trayvon!" Kevin called out, his voice breaking through the tense argument happening near the doors. "You might want to look at this." Trayvon snapped his head around, glaring at his subordinate. "Do not interrupt me, Kevin. Whatever meme you are looking at, it can wait." "I really do not think it can," Kevin replied, stepping away from the bar and walking slowly toward the center of the room, his eyes still glued to his screen. Is not your sister named Amaris, the one who does freelance consulting? The mention of my name made my mother Brenda immediately stand up from her chair. Chelsea stopped pacing, her eyes narrowing with instant disdain. Do not utter that failure's name in my presence, Chelsea spat. We already kicked her out tonight. She has nothing to do with this. Kevin swallowed hard, looking extremely uncomfortable but unable to look away from the photograph. I am just asking because the official corporate account for Amaris Communications just posted a live update, and the tagged location is an exclusive estate in Buckhead. Trevon felt a strange icy dread pool in his stomach. He left Chelsea standing there and marched over to Kevin, snatching the phone roughly out of his hands. What garbage are you looking at? He demanded, staring down at the glowing screen. Trayvon's heart completely stopped beating in his chest. There on the screen was a masterfully captured photograph glowing with golden ambient light. It was not a picture of a struggling freelancer sitting alone in a cheap apartment. It was a portrait of absolute terrifying power. Standing in the center of the frame, wearing a breathtaking midnight blue silk gown and a diamond pendant that practically blinded the camera, was me, his twin sister. I was standing with perfect, commanding posture, looking down with a serene, untouchable smile, and bowing their heads in complete submission. Their crystal champagne flutes raised in a toast to me were the two most powerful men Trevon knew. On my right was Donovan Pierce, the chief executive officer of Apex Holdings. The man Trevon had spent $24,000 trying to impress the man who held Trevon's career in his hands. On my left was Richard, the billionaire real estate tycoon and Chelsea's father, the man who was supposed to validate their elite status. Both men looked entirely captivated, desperate for my approval. They were treating me not as an equal, but as their superior. Trevon could not breathe. His eyes darted to the caption below the photograph, written in crisp, professional text. It read, "Celebrating the 30th birthday of the most powerful woman in PR. Thank you to our esteemed clients for trusting Amaris. Communications with your most valuable assets." No, Trevon whispered, his hands shaking so violently that he nearly dropped the phone. This is fake. This has to be Photoshop. She is just a freelancer. She delivers cake. Chelsea ripped the phone from his hands to see what had caused his sudden paralysis. She looked at the screen and let out a blood-curdling scream. The sound tore through the empty ballroom, echoing off the crystal chandeliers. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated horror and absolute social destruction. "That is my father!" Chelsea shrieked, her eyes wide and panicked, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the phone casing. He is bowing to her. Why is he toasting her? Why is Donovan Pierce looking at her like she is a god? This makes no sense, Trayvon. You said she was a nobody. You said she was a broke loser who embarrassed you. My mother Brenda and my father Jerome rushed over. Crowding around the small screen to see the image, my mother let out a loud gasp, covering her mouth with both hands. Her eyes darting frantically between the picture of me, radiating absolute billionaire status, and the empty, sad ballroom around them. It hit them all at the exact same moment, the crushing, devastating reality of what they had done. They had not banished a failure from their party. They had banished the most powerful public relations titan in the city. They had demanded that I surrender my grandfather's vintage watch to make Trevon look elite, completely oblivious to the fact that I literally controlled the elite. They had treated me like a peasant, while the kings they worshipped were secretly paying me millions of dollars to clean up their messes. The realization crashed over Trevon like a physical blow. The reason his party was empty, the reason every single executive had abandoned him, the reason his calls were ignored. It was all because of me. I had summoned them, and they had come running. They had dropped Trevon without a second thought, because an invitation from Amaris was a matter of life and death. Trevon staggered backward, bumping into an empty table, the glasses rattling against the silence. He looked around the $24,000 room. The melting ice sculpture, the untouched food, the massive lead sign mocking him with the words, Elite Era. He had sacrificed his own twin sister to the altar of black excellence, and in return, she had systematically dismantled his entire life without ever raising her voice. "I am ruined," Trevon gasped, his voice breaking into a pathetic sob, clutching his chest as panic overtook him. "Donovan is never going to promote me. He is going to destroy me. I just insulted the woman who holds his reputation in her hands." Chelsea threw the phone at his chest, her face twisted with a mixture of betrayal and absolute terror. "My father is going to kill us," she screamed. "You made me treat the most powerful woman in Atlanta like a servant. Do you know what she could do to our family? She could bury us." The ballroom descended into pure chaos. The few remaining relatives stared in stunned silence, watching the golden boy of the family completely unravel his perfect image, shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The dominoes had fallen exactly as I planned, and they had crushed every single delusion my toxic family had ever held. It was exactly 1 in the morning when the last of the armored SUVs and sleek Maybachs pulled out of the secure gates of the Hilltop estate. The exclusive Client Appreciation Gala had been a monumental and overwhelming triumph. Throughout the entire evening, Richard and Donovan had orbited me like grateful subjects, desperate to ensure their retainer fees were secure and their secrets remained permanently buried. The atmosphere had been thick with genuine respect, a stark contrast to the desperate fawning that usually characterized corporate networking events. I had not just proven my worth to the elite of Atlanta, I had reminded them that my silence was the foundation of their success. Leaving the cleanup to my impeccable event staff, I had returned to the serene quiet of my downtown penthouse. I had shed the midnight blue silk gown and washed away the heavy evening makeup, slipping into a comfortable silk robe. The adrenaline of the night was finally beginning to ebb, replaced by a profound and settling peace. Jordan, my executive assistant, was sitting quietly at the mahogany conference table, reviewing the final digital analytics from the carefully timed social media post. We were simply enjoying the quiet aftermath of a flawlessly executed strategy. Then the silence of the penthouse was violently shattered. My personal cell phone, which had been mercifully quiet for the past few hours, suddenly began to vibrate aggressively against the glass coffee table. The screen lit up in the dim room, flashing Trevon's name. Jordan paused his typing and looked up, an amused smirk playing on his lips. "It seems the golden boy has finally found his voice," Jordan noted softly, leaning back in his leather chair. I stared at the glowing screen, watching it buzz across the glass. Part of me considered letting it ring out into the void to let him stew in the agonizing silence of his own making. But the architect in me, the woman who had meticulously arranged every single falling domino, wanted to hear the final crash. I let it ring 3 times before I slowly reached out and swiped the screen to accept the call. I did not bring the device to my ear. I simply tapped the speakerphone button and set the phone back down on the glass table, leaning back against the velvet cushions of my sofa. "What the hell did you do?" Trevon's voice exploded through the tiny speakers. He was screaming so loudly and hysterically that the audio distorted into a ragged grating noise. "Did you bewitch them, Amaris? How did you do this? You stole my guests. You ruined my life." "Chelsea's Dad is screaming at her for not knowing you. You bitch." The sheer panic and raw terror in his voice filled my luxurious living room. In the background of the call, I could hear the chaotic echoes of the Ritz-Carlton parking garage. I heard the screeching of tires, the slamming of car doors, and the muffled, frantic sounds of our parents arguing bitterly. Trevon was hyperventilating, his breath catching in his throat as his entire fabricated reality collapsed around him. I took a slow, calm sip of cucumber water, letting his hysterical accusations hang in the air for a long, agonizing moment. Jordan watched the phone with a look of deep satisfaction. "You call yourself elite?" I said, my voice dropping to a smooth, chilling calm that cut directly through his frantic sobbing. "But you did not know your VIPs pay me millions to hide their stupidity." Trevon choked on a sob. The false bravado and corporate arrogance completely stripped away, leaving nothing but a terrified little boy whose toy had just been broken. "You set me up!" he wailed, his voice cracking pathetically. "You purposely humiliated me in front of Donovan Pierce? Do you have any idea what you have done? My career is completely over." Chelsea's father just told her she married a fraud and a liability. "I did not set you up," Trevon, I replied. My tone as cold and unyielding as a glacier. "You set yourself up. You called me 3 days ago, demanding $2,000 to buy wine for a man who does not even respect you. You ambushed me in our parents' living room, trying to steal our grandfather's vintage watch so you could play dress-up. You and your toxic wife stood in a hotel hallway and told me I was a struggling peasant who was not allowed at our shared birthday party because my very presence would offend the elite." I paused, listening to his ragged breathing over the speaker. "The men you practically worship, the men you beg to attend your little party, are the same men who sit in my office and beg me to save them from federal prison and corporate ruin. All I did tonight was send out a piece of paper with my name on it. Your precious guests made their own choices. They chose their survival over your $24,000 catering spread." "It is not fair!" Trevon cried out, the desperation escalating to a fever pitch as he paced around the concrete parking garage. "You are just a freelancer," Mom said. "You were struggling. You do not belong in those rooms. How can you possibly know Donovan Pierce? How can you be the face of Amaris Communications? Why did you not tell us the truth?" "Why would I tell the truth to a family that only measures worth in designer labels and borrowed money?" I asked, leaning forward slightly, resting my elbows on my knees. "You worshipped the illusion of wealth. Trevon, you took out loans to rent a ballroom to impress men who do not even know your last name. I built an actual empire in the shadows because real power does not need to beg for a seat at the table. Real power builds the table and decides who gets to eat." "Chelsea is threatening to leave me," Trevon sobbed. The reality of his marital disaster finally sinking in, she said. Her father threatened to cut off her trust fund entirely if she remains legally tied to someone who insulted the most powerful public relations CEO in the South. "Amaris, you have to fix this. You have to call Mr. Pierce tomorrow morning and tell him this was all a massive misunderstanding. Tell him we are incredibly close. Tell him I am a good investment for the vice president role." I looked at Jordan, who was silently shaking his head at the sheer audacity of my brother. The entitlement was truly a sickness, a toxic disease deeply rooted in the way our mother had raised him. He still believed I owed him my salvation, even after he had spent his entire adult life trying to destroy my dignity. He wanted me to use the very influence he had mocked just hours ago to save his hollow marriage and his mediocre career. "Fix this," I echoed, letting out a soft, dry laugh that carried absolutely no warmth. "You banish me from our birthday? You call me a classless joke. You let your racist wife degrade me, and now you want me to use my leverage to save you from the consequences of your own arrogance? Please." Amaris Trevon begged the word, tearing from his throat in a pathetic whine. "I am your twin brother. You have to help me. Mom and Dad went into massive debt for this party. We are all going to drown if you do not make this right." Before I could tell him exactly where he could shove his apologies, the sound of shuffling echoed over the speaker. Someone was wrestling the phone away from him. I heard a sharp scuffle, the heavy breathing of my brother, and then the sharp, toxic voice of my mother Brenda, hijacking the call, preparing to unleash her own brand of desperate fury upon me. The frantic breathing on the other end of the line was suddenly cut short by the sound of a violent scuffle. Trayvon was practically hyperventilating, dropping the phone before a pair of manicured hands snatched it away. It was my mother Brenda. Her voice did not hold a single ounce of maternal warmth or even simple human decency. It was pure venom, a screeching, aggressive tone that used to make me cower in my childhood bedroom. "You are a toxic, vindictive snake!" Brenda screamed into the receiver, the sheer volume forcing me to hold the phone a few inches away from my ear. "What is wrong with you, Amaris? What kind of evil, jealous monster deliberately destroys her own twin brother's career on his 30th birthday? I sat at my vanity table staring at my reflection in the lighted mirror. I picked up a cotton pad and slowly began wiping the bold red lipstick from my mouth, watching the bright color stain the white cotton. I did not interrupt her. I just let her expose the absolute rot at the core of her soul. "You think you are so smart with your little gold invitations?" Brenda continued, her voice cracking with hysterical rage. "You think because you tricked some rich white men into coming to your house that it makes you better than us. You humiliated your brother in front of Chelsea and her entire family. You made us look like absolute fools in that empty ballroom." "We gave you everything!" Brenda cried out, shifting seamlessly into her favorite role as the eternal victim. "We raised you. We fed you. We tried to teach you how to be a respectable black woman, but you have always been so deeply broken and bitter. You could not stand to see Trevon succeed because you are a pathetic spinster who has to buy friends. You have always ruined everything, Amaris. Every family holiday, every dinner, you always bring this dark, negative energy because you hate seeing other people happy." I could hear my father, Jerome, yelling in the background, his deep voice rumbling with misplaced righteous indignation. "She is a disgrace," Jerome shouted, making sure his words bled through the phone line. "Tell her she is a complete disgrace to the Washington name. No daughter of mine behaves like a street thug sabotaging her own blood for sport. She is just a jealous little girl throwing a tantrum." "Do you hear your father?" Brenda hissed, her breath hitting the microphone. "You are a disgrace to this family. But I am not letting you get away with this little stunt, Amaris. I am the matriarch of this family, and you will respect my authority. Tomorrow morning, I am driving up to whatever rented house you are pretending to own, and I am going to drag you out by your hair if I have to." I remained perfectly silent, running a damp cloth over my cheeks, removing the expensive foundation. "You are going to march right into Donovan Pierce's office," Brenda demanded, her delusion reaching its absolute peak. "You are going to get on your knees and you are going to apologize to him and to Richard. You are going to tell them that you are a fraud and that Trevon is the one who truly deserves their respect. You are going to beg for their forgiveness, Amaris. Or so help me God, I will destroy that little consulting business of yours. I will call every single client you have and tell them what a manipulative liar you are." It was breathtaking, truly. The sheer magnitude of her delusion was almost scientific in its perfection. My mother was standing in the ruins of a $24,000 party that she had bullied my brother into funding. She was staring at irrefutable photographic evidence that I controlled the most powerful billionaires in the city. Yet her brain absolutely refused to process the reality of my power. She still thought she could command me. She still believed that her suburban anger was terrifying enough to make me submit. She thought my empire was just a fragile illusion that she could swat away with a harsh scolding. Her gaslighting was so deeply ingrained that she genuinely believed she could rewrite reality just by screaming loud enough. In the background, I could hear Chelsea sobbing uncontrollably. "My dad is not answering my calls," Chelsea wailed, her voice shrill and panicked. "He blocked me, Trevon. My own father blocked my number because of your psycho sister. I cannot do this anymore. I want a divorce, Trevon. I am not staying married to a laughingstock." The sound of Trevon begging his wife to stay echoed pathetically through the speaker. My mother ignored the collapse of her son's marriage, entirely focused solely on tearing me down to maintain her own fragile ego. "Are you listening to me?" Amaris Brenda barked. "You will fix this. You owe your brother your life. You owe this family everything you have." I placed the makeup wipe on the silver tray and finally leaned closer to the speakerphone. My voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the chilling weight of absolute zero. "Mom," I said, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "You really do not understand how the world works, do you?" "How dare you speak to me like that?" she screeched. "I am your mother. You will do exactly what I say to fix your brother's life." I let out a soft, tired sigh. "You still think Trevon's career is something I can fix with an apology? You think Donovan Pierce cares about your suburban family drama? You think he gives a single damn about Trevon's rented tuxedo or your unhinged threats?" I paused, letting the dead silence on the line stretch out, forcing her to listen to the calm, steady rhythm of my breathing. You are threatening to march over here and force me to apologize to the chief executive officer of Apex Holdings. I continued, keeping my tone terrifyingly gentle. But Mom, you are forgetting one very important detail. Donovan Pierce does not command me. He works for me. His reputation, his stock options, and his freedom from federal prison exist solely because I allow them to. You think you can destroy my business by calling my clients? I asked, a dark amusement coloring my words. My clients are the ones who fled your pathetic little party tonight. They ran away from your golden boy the second they saw my name on a card because they are terrified of me. You have zero leverage, Mother. You have no power here. You are just a loud, angry woman standing in an empty room holding the bill for a party nobody wanted to attend. The line went completely still. The screaming stopped. The gaslighting hit a solid, impenetrable wall of truth and shattered into a million pieces. Brenda was finally beginning to understand that she was entirely, utterly outmatched. I let the silence hang there for a few seconds, letting the absolute reality of her powerlessness sink deep into her bones before I delivered the final blow. You said you were going to march over here tomorrow morning to force an apology, Mom, I said, a dark, icy laugh escaping my lips. But you really do not have to wait until tomorrow to speak to Donovan Pierce. In fact, I can save you the trip entirely. I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Trayvon was breathing heavily near the phone, listening to every word. Let me explain exactly how the real corporate world works, I continued, my voice dropping into the smooth, clinical tone I used in boardrooms. Donovan Pierce is the chief executive officer of Apex Holdings. Apex Holdings is my biggest client. What Trayvon and his pathetic little networking group failed to realize is that Apex just finalized the acquisition of Trayvon's mid-level firm 3 days ago. I heard a choked gasp from Trayvon. He had no idea. When a major acquisition happens, Mom, I explained patiently, they hire outside consultants to audit the executive staff. They want to know who is a valuable asset and who is a desperate climbing liability. Donovan hired my firm Ameris Communications to handle the executive purge for this merger. The line was so quiet I could hear the ice melting in someone's abandoned drink in that empty ballroom. For the past month, I have been reviewing Trayvon's performance metrics. I stated the facts, hitting them like physical strikes. His numbers are mediocre at best. He is not a visionary. He is just a man who wears expensive suits and speaks in empty corporate buzzwords. But even with his pathetic numbers, Donovan was willing to let him keep his mid-level job. That was until tonight. What did you do? Brenda whispered, her voice trembling with an emotion she had never shown me before. Genuine fear. I did exactly what I was hired to do, I replied. Tonight, Trayvon threw a flashy $24,000 party using his parents' retirement savings specifically to manipulate and flatter the very executives who are buying his company. He tried to play the role of an elite high roller while begging his sister for wine money. In the corporate world, Mom, that is not called ambition. That is called being a massive public relations liability. I paused, letting the weight of my words crush the last remaining fragments of their delusion. So tonight, while you were all standing in that empty ballroom wondering why your guests fled in terror, I submitted my final executive audit to Donovan Pierce. I officially redlined Trayvon's name. The promotion is gone, Trayvon. Your current job is gone. You are fired effective immediately. There was dead silence on the other end of the line, a thick, heavy quiet that stretched on for what felt like an eternity. The grand illusion of black excellence, the false prestige, the desperate climbing, it had all been completely incinerated in a matter of minutes. And then the explosion came. It was not my mother screaming this time. It was Chelsea. You are fired! Chelsea shrieked, her voice piercing through the speakerphone with such intensity I had to pull the device away from my ear. You are a jobless fraud, Trayvon. You told me you were going to be a vice president. You told me you were securing our future. Chelsea, please, Trayvon begged, his voice breaking into pathetic sobs. I can fix this. I can talk to him. Talk to who? Chelsea roared back at him. The man who just fired you, or the woman who literally holds my father's entire billionaire legacy in her hands? You are a joke, Trevon. Your whole family is a joke. You made me insult the one person who could destroy my father. I am done. I am taking my things, and I am going to my father's estate. I want a divorce. No, Chelsea. Wait, Trevon wailed, the sound of his footsteps echoing as he presumably chased after her retreating figure. My father Jerome was shouting now, demanding to know how they were going to pay off the massive loan he took out for the party. My mother was hyperventilating, the sound of her gasping breaths filling the background. The toxic family dynamic that had suffocated me for 30 years was imploding from within, tearing itself apart piece by piece under the crushing weight of its own greed and entitlement. Brenda picked up the phone, her voice stripped of all its former arrogance, reduced to a pathetic, whimpering mess. Amaris, please, she begged. You cannot do this to us. The loan for the party, it will bankrupt us. Your brother has nothing. We are your family. Please, you have to fix this. You have the money, you have the power. Just call Mr. Pierce and tell him it was a mistake. I listened to her beg the woman who had called me a peasant, an embarrassment, a bitter spinster. I felt absolutely nothing for her. The well of my empathy was completely dry. I picked up my phone, bringing the microphone close to my lips. Mom, I said, my voice perfectly calm and steady over the sounds of their complete destruction. Do you remember what you told me in the hallway of the Ritz-Carlton earlier tonight? You said we could only afford one party. I heard her let out a choked sob. You were right, I continued, the finality of my words ringing like a gavel striking wood. We could only afford one party. And mine was the only one that mattered. Never contact me again. I pressed the red button on my screen, severing the connection. My fingers moved swiftly through the settings, blocking my mother's number, my father's number, and my brother's number. I wiped their access to my life from existence, ensuring they could never reach out to me again. I stood up from my vanity table, smoothing the silk of my midnight blue gown. I walked across the plush carpet of my master suite and opened the heavy glass doors leading out to the private balcony. The cool night air washed over me, carrying the faint scent of rain and pine. I looked out over the sprawling grounds of my hilltop estate, the driveway still lined with the luxury vehicles of the most powerful people in the city who were currently downstairs drinking my champagne and waiting for my return. I was no longer the forgotten twin, the scapegoat, the delivery girl. I was victorious, independent, and utterly untouchable. I took a deep breath of the crisp night air, smiled at the glittering city lights below, and walked back inside to rejoin my guests. The ultimate lesson here is that your true value is never defined by toxic people who fail to appreciate your worth, even if they are family. Real power does not come from loud boasting or begging for validation. It comes from building your success in silence, setting unbreakable boundaries, and bravely walking away from environments that demand you shrink yourself. You owe absolutely no loyalty to those who only offer disrespect. Your greatest revenge is simply choosing your peace, independence, and unapologetic happiness. Have you ever had to cut ties with toxic relatives? Please share your story below and subscribe.